of handling Wallace and not allowing Wallace to use his interviewing skills to get him to say things that he didn't want to say. From what I understand, Wallace is supposed to be very famous for being able to get people to say things they don't want to say. But I didn't see one single time that come across with Brother Malcolm.
After that, there was another interview. I don't know who the interviewer was, but with Talmadge Hayer. And I was just wondering what your response is to what was said.
Okay, with the Hayer interview, I basically, to me, he did not reveal much that was not either known or, seriously speculated upon. He came across to me as a person definitely not sharp enough to have planned this assassination. I think he was a functionary, and I still would like to know, who the organizer was, the person who pulled it together, who developed the strategy. It's just no way I could believe from watching that Hayer would be the person, who could do this.
Right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Now, you were there when Malcolm's life was taken. Right. Before you give me your narrative of what happened and what you saw, tell me what your relationship was to Malcolm.
Well, Gill, I was a person who had first met Brother Malcolm in, I first heard Brother Malcolm speak in the summer of 1962 when I moved to Harlem. And I'll never forget, I moved in like on a Friday night, and that Saturday afternoon I was walking down Lenox Avenue, very new to Harlem, not knowing much about it, having grown up in Alabama, I had all these stereotyped views of Harlem. And as I was walking down with my roommate, we saw a crowd gathering at 116th Street and Lenox Avenue, where the mosque was. And so we asked what was going on, and they said Malcolm X was going to speak. So we decided to hear him. We'd heard, very vaguely about him. Usually he was the boogeyman, who, everybody was afraid of, or at least putting down. So we wanted to hear what he had to say. And so we stood there, and I remember it was very hot. And we stood there for about 3 hours. He spoke for almost 3 hours.
What was your impression of what he had to say?
I was mesmerized. And the thing I think that impressed me the most, there were two things that he did that impressed me. One, he talked about the psychological battle that we were involved in. We hear a lot about the physical battle, that racism had caused. But he talked about the battle for the mind. He did a lot of talking about that and how we must be aware of this and what was happening. And then the second thing he did that for me was an eye-opener was that he said that we were not up against, the Bull Connor, the George Wallace, the Ku Klux Klan leader. We were up against a system. And that was really, for me, very frankly, the first time that I had heard someone explain that there was a system behind all of this. And that to get all into a complete stir, about a George Wallace, if George Wallace was gone, there would be the system would say there would be someone to replace him. If you're not going to get rid of white supremacy by knocking off George Wallace or Bull Connor, or the leader of the Klan, because there was a whole system that we were involved in a struggle against. And that, to me, made things much clearer as to what we were truly up against, rather than this idea that I think the civil rights movement too often promoted, that if you get rid of a few, wild people like George Wallace and everything is going to be cool. He opened my eyes to that day.
What did you go on to be within, your relationship with him?
From that time on, when I heard him speak that first time, I became a serious Malcolm X supporter. But I was not going to become a Muslim, which means then that I could only see him from a distance. Then in early January, and I think it was early January 1964, a friend of mine asked me did I want to be a part of a new black nationalist organization that was going to be formed. And I said yes. So she was very mysterious. She said, well, I'm going to call you on Saturday morning around 8 o'clock, and I'll tell you where to come. Don't ask me no questions, just come. So Saturday morning, the call came. I was ready. I went out of the house. I went over to the location that she had told me to be there. I walked into this room, and I saw a couple of people I recognized: Dr. John Henry Clark, John Oliver Killens, the novelist, and a couple of other people that I recognized. And I met them. We were sitting around talking. Nobody's, passing along any information. And then I looked up, and Brother Malcolm walked in.
Okay.
And that was my first indication that he was going to be a part of this.
Okay, let's take a break and we'll be back with more. Stay with us, please.
Are you tired of overnighters that don't go your screen now?
What happened at this meeting?
Well, at that meeting, we began to organize what became the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And I ended up being the editor of the organization's newsletter, the BlackLash, mainly because no one else volunteered to do it. I had no journalistic experience at the time, but I became the editor of the BlackLash. And for the next 14 months, from that time until February 21st, 1965, I was a part of the OAAU and putting out our little newsletter, the BlackLash.
What would you say his influence was on you and your development?
He had a tremendous influence on me. He gave me my worldview. At the time I met Brother Malcolm, I had no worldview. You know, I had been growing up in Alabama, and I knew about, racism and white supremacy and those kinds of things, but I had no worldview. Brother Malcolm introduced me to the international, made me develop an international perspective. As a Pan-Africanist, I became a Pan-Africanist because of him. He made me see that we were involved in a system. He was a teacher. He literally taught myself and people like myself how to perceive the world in which we lived. And that's very, very important, because then you can develop a means of operating if you can see clearly the world that you live in. And that's what he did for myself and others.
Can you describe his persona? What kind of a person was he off of the speaker's stand? Well,
Gill, I was fortunate enough to have had opportunity to be with him in small settings. And when you see him, I mean, he would laugh and he would joke, and he was very courteous, and just he was a type person that you would never know if you did not know who he was, that this is one of the, the political and intellectual giants of the 20th century that you're dealing with here. At the time, I think I was aware of that, but it did not, you didn't have time to think about it a lot, because you were busy involved with him in different things and working with him. But he was a person who could communicate. He was a communicator.
Noticed.
I mean, they talk about a great communicator. Brother Malcolm was a great communicator, and one of the things that he was able to do as a leader was to attract people from many different areas and make them transcend their own narrow interests and become a part of the movement. And his movement was not only national, but it was also international.
What were the forces, in your view, that wanted Malcolm dead?
There's no doubt, as we saw from that segment that you showed, that there were major members of the Nation of Islam who wanted him dead. There's also no doubt that the United States government wanted him dead. Now, people say, why do you say that? Gil, whenever there's an investigation of a murder, the first thing they want to try to find out is who benefited. And if you look at it, the Nation of Islam did not benefit. They may have thought they were going to, but they did not benefit from the assassination of Malcolm X. In fact, it destroyed that organization for all practical purposes. They have never been the same since then.
What would the U.S. government have to gain?
The United States government was very afraid that Brother Malcolm, on an international level, he was planning on taking the U.S. before the World Court for violating the human rights of African American people. He was advocating a linking up of people of African descent in the Caribbean, Africa, in Europe, South America, and in the United States. All of this was at the beginning, but the fact that he was doing this, and especially in the context of the times, we're talking about the 1960s, the early 1960s, which was the height of the so-called Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, and they were involved in a tremendous propaganda struggle with each other. So the fact that Brother Malcolm was taking the movement that was happening in this country and putting it on an international level was the same that England had to deal with, when colonialism was put on an international level, or France. So the United States had always been able to kind of keep the racism against black people in this country within the confines of the United States. Nobody else could say anything about it. Brother Malcolm said, no, this is a part of the whole movement that's happening worldwide or people of color, trying to throw off the control of people of European descent.
With
and
that-
he was connecting us to that international movement. That was his goal. The OAAU had a foreign policy that was designed to connect the movement in this country to the international movement against European domination around the world.
All right, on that note, let's take still another break. We'll be back with more with Mr. Peter Bailey.
I don't know about you, but I often stop and your free information will be sent to you by mail without obligation. So call now.
Call 1-800-290-2100 to receive free information in the mail. The call is free and so is this handy insurance guide. Call 1-800-290-2100. There's no risk or obligation. That's 1-800-290-2100 or visit our website at colonialpenn.com.
Did Malcolm ever express to you the certainty of his demise?
He never expressed the certainty to me personally. I heard him speak, and when he talked about that possibility, and of course we were aware of that possibility, but I, for one, don't accept the concept that Sunday he knew that was going to be the day that he was going to be assassinated. And the reason I don't, Gill, is that when he came into the Audubon that day, I was already there. And he asked me to come backstage. And when I went backstage and was speaking to him, I remembered very clearly, I showed him a column from the New York Times about the formation of the Deacons for Defense and Justice. And he said, that's good, when I showed him that. And we were talking about the BlackLash. And he said that he was going to go to Mississippi that week at the invitation of SNCC. And then when he came back, he was going to spend the next 6 months building up the OAAU. See, as you can imagine, it was difficult to get people to do anything when he wasn't around, and he had been traveling a lot during that last year.
Right.
So now here he was making plans for 6 months. He also said to me that he was going to make the BlackLash into a tabloid-sized newspaper. So with him making plans like that, I don't think that he was, that he had this kind of premonition that February 21st, 1965 was going to be the day of the assassination. But of course he was aware of that possibility.
You were there.
And he made us aware of it.
All right, you were there before his arrival.
Yes.
What happened when he arrived? Just give us a brief narrative of
Well, I can remember I was in the, when you come into the Audubon, there's like a little room up in the front. And I was in that area when he came in.
Yeah.
And he spoke. And that's when he said to me, Brother Peter, when you get a chance, come backstage.
Right.
So I went backstage, and when I was backstage, Gill, I must say that was the first time that I remember seeing him where he looked a little harried, not fearful, not afraid, but just harried. And it took me a while, after the assassination to begin to wonder why. And I said to myself, now, the previous Sunday, his home had been firebombed, and his children had been under attack with that firebombing. Now, I don't care how devoted you are, or how strong you are. When your children come under attack, it has to give you pause, and ask yourself, do you have the right to do this, to your children? And I think that was the reason why he looked a little bit harried that day.
So
but he still had the fire, he still had the determination, he was making plans, he was responding. So this whole idea that he was in some kind of, real deep funk, I didn't see it.
So you stayed in this ante-room, which was off the stage.
It was off the stage. Now, I wasn't back there when the shooting actually started.
Where did
because
you go?
He sent me back up front. He asked which one of us recognized Reverend Gill, and I
Who was
said that I
expected
did.
to come.
He was supposed to come in and make an appeal for clothing for his children, clothing for his children because they had been burned up in the firebombing. So I said I recognized him. So he sent me out front. He said when he comes in, bring him backstage. So when I was sitting there, looking at the steps where you come up, and I heard Brother Malcolm say, "Assalamu alaikum," and the next thing I heard was shooting.
What'd you do?
And I jumped up and I ran into the main ballroom, through the doors into the main ballroom, and you could hear people screaming and yelling and running toward the door. And I was knocked to the floor, and I lay there until everybody ran by. Then I jumped up and I ran down and I jumped up on the stage. And when I jumped up on the stage, Mary Koshiyama had him cradled in her arms, and I could see holes. They'd open his shirt, and I could see all these holes, in his chest. And I remember thinking, he's going to die. He's going to die.
Oh, he was still breathing.
He was still breathing. He was gasping. I could actually see him gasping for breath. And but I think by the time the brothers got back from the you know, with the roller. I can't remember what you call that thing from the hospital.
The gurney, yes.
Gurney.
Yeah.
He was no longer doing that. I think maybe he had died by that time. I'm not sure.
Peter Bailey, thank you.